Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a list. Actually, it's going to be a top 20 and it's going to be a winter list. To my surprise, I'm coming up on 3 years on YouTube this coming week actually. And so I have never done a winter list on the channel, and I've gotten a couple requests recently by some folks, and I do try my best to kind of accommodate requests that I get. Can't always promise it, but it is something that I try to do if possible. I had some free time tonight, so I figured, what the heck, let's do a winter list. And I thought about maybe the best way to do this. And so I've divided it up into 10 fragrances that are going to be in the niche world, 10 fragrances that are going to be in the designer world. And we've divided it up even further, 5 fragrances that are in production and available to purchase in the niche world, 5 fragrances that are discontinued in the niche world, and then 5 fragrances that are in production and available to purchase currently at the end, while I'm making the video anyways, this is true, of the designer world, and 5 fragrances that are discontinued in the designer world. I've got a ton of discontinued designers that I would love to feature on this winter list, and winter is probably the fragrances that I love wearing the most. Many times I'll just wear these fragrances even throughout the year, even when it's hot. But this time of the year is really where these fragrances shine. It's where they're made for, the heavier fragrances that have character, fragrances that leave a lasting impression when you smell it or take you back to a different time when you wore it. One of my favorite aspects of a perfume is sometimes, because I wear so many different things, if I haven't worn a fragrance in 6 months or a year and then I put it on, it will immediately transport me back to the last time that I wore it. Not always, but some of these fragrances with strength and character do exactly that. So let's get started. This is going to be a relatively long list. We are going to do scent of the day, which could easily be on this list. So you kind of get a little bit of a freebie here. And today my scent of the day is Halston Z14, which is just perfect for December weather. Interestingly enough, I've done some holiday videos on the channel. So I've done things like a Christmas video, I've done Thanksgiving videos and Halloween videos, but I don't believe I've ever done a just out and out winter list. So Halston Z14 is discontinued, so this could easily be on the discontinued side of the ledger. However, there were so many bottles made that you can easily still find bottles available. So even though, and by the way, I'm going off of Profumum. So there's some on here which some people think are discontinued that Profumum says is still available. There's some on here that Profumum says are discontinued that are easy to find still. And Halston Z14 is one of those fragrances. It's also maybe one of the fragrances that has left one of the most lasting marks on sort of the current fragrance industry that people forget about, because the influence that this fragrance had on icons in the fashion and fragrance world. Like, for example, Tom Ford was infatuated with Halston. He wanted to be Roy Halston. He purchased Roy Halston's house after he really made it big, and his Roy Halston's house in New York, I believe. And I don't know if he lives in that house or if it's one of the many houses that he owns and he kind of travels back and forth. But Halston was this, big influence on Tom Ford. We probably would not have Tom Ford today if it wasn't for Halston. I would go so far as to say Tom Ford is a modern day Halston, if you will. And many people forget just how big Halston was. He was kind of the image of American fashion, and he was competing against the best brands of the world from France and all over. But Z14 was produced by Max Gavari and Vincent Marcello in 76, according to Parfumo. Some folks have said 74, but Parfumo says 76. That's what I'm going to go with. And there's many different versions. The one that I'm wearing today is a Halston Fragrances Inc. version. I know that there's newer bottles created by EA, if I'm not mistaken, Elizabeth Arden. And this is basically a spicy, woody fragrance that if you want kind of a niche version of this, Tom Ford actually made a fragrance which is discontinued called Italian Cypress, which I reviewed on the channel if you want kind of an idea. There's also Vendetta Pour Homme, which smells very similar to this, but I love this sort of big red cinnamon warmth. Also Clive Christian's X, which is probably one of my favorite Clive Christians, feels heavily inspired by this. So, many fragrance houses have tried to recreate this over the years, but wearing the original, man, I'll tell you, one of the things that the original does that I don't get in the Clive Christian, or even Roja made one called Reckless. And you can even smell a little bit of Z14 in his Apex. It's interesting, but you know, the original Z14 has this ability to, at the same time, feel modern with the spices and the warmth of the cinnamon. I love that big red cinnamon and patchouli and all that stuff. But it also sort of has this old school, you know, texture from the moss, and, you know, the way fragrances were done back then were just so different. I mean, if you've never smelled vintage fragrances, if you're newer into getting into vintage fragrances, start with something that's easy to acquire like this. And we're actually going to end the day with one that is discontinued but easy to acquire as well. These are great fragrances to get your nose on, just the structure and how it's so different back then, because you get so many different aspects, you know, and you get the cypress, you get the leather, the amberiness here, but it's that cinnamon sort of enveloping, that big red cinnamon, as I call it. And I love that part of this fragrance. I love the spices, the green touches. This is, you know, the smell of basically partying in the 70s for me. This is what I imagine that they wore to, you know, the big nightclubs that became famous and all that stuff. So yes, many people see this as a cheapie or a cheap because it was cheap later on in its life. You could find it at TJ Maxx here in America for 10, 15 bucks sometimes. But this is not a cheap smelling fragrance. I think it's an amazing creation. Loved wearing it today. Fit perfectly at work. So that's my scent of the day. Okay, so let's get started on the niche side of things first. So we're going to do 5 niche that are in production and you can just go buy without any issues. And then we're going to do 5 discontinued niche fragrances. So the first one is going to be an Amouage. And Amouage is a brand that is tailor-made for colder weather a lot of times, even though many folks in Oman obviously wear their fragrances in the heat and stuff like that. It's very common in the Middle East to wear these type of fragrances when it's very, very hot. But the makeup with frankincense and ambers and oud and stuff like that suits colder weather if you are someone who tries to wear your fragrances in a, let's say, a weather-specific situation. I've given up on that for the most part. Even though when winter comes around, these are the type of fragrances that jump into mind that I want to wear. Don't think I won't wear this in the heat of summer in Texas, because I absolutely will. This is Epic Man. I've got a full review. I love Epic. Epic truly is epic. 2009 this came out. It was done by Rhonda Hamami. Definitely her best fragrance that she's created, hands down. Not even a question on that front. Whenever I did the review, I discussed sort of feeling like you're in the desert, and, you know, when night comes, the temperature drops very quickly in the desert, you know, and someone's telling a story and there's a fire going on because it gets very cold, and, you know, someone takes this spice combination that is sort of a secret. They won't tell the other side what the spice combination is, and they throw it into the fire. And that spice combination is the frankincense and the myrrh and the pink pepper and the spices of cardamom and myrtle and nutmeg and cumin and mace and saffron and all this stuff. And whenever they throw it in the fire, it sort of explodes into this fire of like greens and, you know, hues of almost like you're looking at aurora borealis or something, but in the desert from the spice that was thrown onto the fire. And there is something about this, because I've worn it so much in winter, it just reminds me of previous times that I've worn it, that cold weather hitting this fragrance and really allowing the spices to show themselves, and the you know, smoke that comes with it, the frankincense that's so well done in here. Such a beautiful example of what a proper Amouage fragrance should be. Oh, it's amazing. You know, there's floral touches from the geranium, which add a little bit of this spicy green rosiness. The green color is just a perfect, that emerald green representation with the you know, emerald colored stone and the cap. I love Epic. Epic is just one of my all-time favorites, and there's a full review on the channel if you want to kind of dig deeper into it. Okay, next on the list is a fragrance that I'm hoping to review very, very soon, and this is from the house of Profumum Roma, and this is called Arso. Now, Arso got brought up in one of my most recent reviews. I reviewed, a fragrance by January Scent Project, which should be released sometime around Christmas, if I'm not mistaken. It's called Northern Flicker. And Northern Flicker was built around this pine absolute. And that's exactly what Arso is. Arso is built around pine resin. And if you've ever smelled Serge Lutens Fil en Aiguille, it has a lot of Fil en Aiguille in it, but done in the Profumum Roma way. So it doesn't have as much movement as Fil en Aiguille. Of course, Fil en Aiguille is a Christopher Sheldrake creation, and he's a master perfumer. I don't know who the perfumer of this is, but I know it's done in the Profumum Roma style, meaning you get a lot of oily, dense sort of materials that feel like they take a long time to break down. And this doesn't move too much, you know, it doesn't shift too much. It's much more linear. It lasts a really long time. You can tell that the ingredients are of extreme high quality. It's pine resin, cedar leaf, frankincense, and leather. And so there are bits and pieces here that you don't get in Fil en Aiguille. There are bits and pieces in Fil en Aiguille you don't get here. But all in all, if you like one, or if you are interested in Fil en Aiguille, you could always check out Northern Flicker by January Scent Project. But if you have one of these, you know, it's in the vein of the other two that I've been discussing. But you can go check out my review of the January Scent Project if you want a little bit of an in-depth thought on it. But I'm going to do a full review of this because it deserves it. Very woody, resinous, just a beautiful creation. I love the touches that come through. And I've come to really appreciate how Profumum Roma fragrances sort of break down. You know, they wear for a very long time on the skin, but they are very linear. What people say about them is true, but if you like the smell like this, the woody, resinous feel, it just lasts all the way through. A lot of these are 10, 12-hour fragrances, very high quality. Arso is perfect for the cold weather. Okay, next on the list, we have a patchouli. And actually, this has come to be one of my favorite patchouli fragrances of all time. Even though it's in this newer presentation, people talk about the vintage presentation being different, either in like the vintage bell jar or the original presentation by Serge Lutens. But for me, the Palais Royal, they call that presentation. For me, this is perfectly fine. I don't think I would spend my money on a vintage because I've come to really, really like this. And this is called Bornéo 1834. In Bornéo 1834, this is how the new bottle come. They call it Grazie Ciel or something like that bottle. But basically, this is an earthy, spicy patchouli. It's got patchouli, it's got cacao, it's got this camphoraceous green note with some labdanum, which adds, you know, this oriental sticky resins underneath, spicy cardamom, galbanum, which is a green resin that I absolutely love, and this white blossom note. And this is, again, a Christopher Sheldrake. And Serge Lutens and Christopher Sheldrake collaborated to create this in 2005. This was the inspiration for Coromandel. And it's funny because many people like Coromandel more. Coromandel has that white chocolate note in it, and it's much more refined. You know, it's like he took Bornéo 1834 and just refined it over and over again to give it that Chanel sparkle, that class that you expect from Chanel. Whereas Bornéo 1834 seems rougher, you know, gruff, rough, as if, you know, you're dealing with maybe two brothers that went totally separate paths. They have the same blood in them, but one went into sort of a frontline role, whereas another one was given the silver spoon in their mouth, and they were risen to be an executive and all this stuff. They're both brothers, but they went about achieving their life goals in two different paths. Bornéo 1834 is the harsher, rougher side, unshaven, you know. They have not shied away from the earthiness, the dirtiness here as much. You know, they polished it a lot more in the Chanel. And so that's what I really like. I love the earthy aspect to Bornéo 1834. It's fantastic. And it's really, really grown on me. Probably one of my favorite patchoulis now, even though some folks say in this bottle, the newer bottles, that it has a little bit of like a plastic note that you don't get in the vintage formulation. If that's true, I've come to appreciate that plastic note, believe it or not. It's really grown on me. You know, the cap is very, very cheap, and that's how I imagine this plastic feeling that they're discussing kind of looks like in an image, this cheap sort of 1 cent plastic cap here. But I love this. If you're a patchouli lover and you have not tried Bornéo 1834 in any presentation, perfect for the cold weather. Okay, next on the list is a very special fragrance by a very special perfumer. who I think is probably one of the best in the game right now, Antoine Lee, and this is called Rien. Now, Rien is very fascinating because it's basically a leathery, spicy fragrance that came out in 2006, but to me, this feels like Antoine Lee breaking free of the shackles of sort of the servitude of being a perfumer for some of these big houses. You know, I discussed a little bit of that when I reviewed the most recent Amouage by Bertrand Duchefort called Reasons. Bertrand Duchefort is one of the best perfumers in the game. He's on the Mount Rushmore. He's all of that stuff, okay? But a perfumer can only do what the brief tells him to do, right? And Antoine Lee sort of rebelled against that, you know, because he made some very mass appealing scents from Armani in the early 2000s, but now by 2006, this is the fragrance that really feels like he is like broken free of those chains, you know. And Rien is a fascinating fragrance because it's leathery, it's spicy, it's bold, it is. It can really challenge some people. Some folks get a little bit of the smoky Band-Aid thing here. There's frankincense or pur, safraline, which is like a saffron sort of synthetic creation. I forgot who owns safraline, but it's supposed to be this spicy, leathery, woody. Givaudan. That's it. It's Givaudan. And it's said to contain like these warm tobacco nuances and these spicy characteristics. Okay, so it's resembling saffron with like this rose ketone like floral aspect. Okay, black pepper, which is very prominent here. The leather I adore. Orris Absolute, Cistus Absolute, Patchouli or Pur, Tree Moss, and Vetiver or Pur. Now, what's interesting about this is I took my clothes to the dry cleaners the other day, and they said, Ramsey, there was an issue with the machine. You know, it squirted out these like chemicals on the clothes where it didn't distribute it properly. The machine is supposed to like, you know, spray it or whatever in a spray format. Instead, it just doused it on the clothes. So you can smell it. We'll redo it for you. And the smell smelled like a chemical with like cigarette undertones, you know? And this reminded me of Rien whenever I smelled it. I came back and sprayed it that night. And, you know, it's funny because Rien has that leathery, smoky, chemically type nuance to it. And I was thinking about some of the perfumers, and I'm sure Antoine Lee, when he was a young boy, probably fell into this. I don't know for sure, but Pierre Bourdon talked about sneaking away from Edmond Ruditska to smoke a cigarette, you know, and come back because he wasn't supposed to smoke. As a perfumer, you're not supposed to smoke. Smoking can destroy your nose and stop your ability to smell, but, you know, young men will be young men. And so he talked about kind of being a little bit of an outlaw and coming back. And that's what this fragrance reminded me of, because it reminded me of these perfumers kind of breaking the law, which is exactly what Antoine Lee was doing here. He was breaking the shackles of sort of the servitude of being a perfumer, following the brief, not being able to be original or artistic or express himself, right? And then the name. What were you smoking today? Nothing. Rien literally means nothing. And what's so fascinating about it is it's one of the most heaviest fragrances you'll smell. I mean, this fragrance will last for forever, especially if you spray it on your clothes. My God, I feel like you'll smell it months later. It's kind of one of those, but it doesn't smell like the disgusting modern day amber wood scents that last forever. It really feels like an artistic gem. I mean, I love Rien. I love Rien Intense Incense as well. That also could be on this list, but I'll review these one of these days. But Rien is just, I think, such a special fragrance by Antoine Lee. So that's the fourth one that's still available in the niche side for winter. Now, number 5, and these are not ranked, by the way, but number 5 on the list is Creation E, which in the United States is what they call it. Overseas, because there was like a copyright issue, this is called Enigma pour Homme. So Enigma became Creation E, basically. And this is the Pure Parfum. I've reviewed this on the channel, or I've done a comparison video with the Parfum Cologne, which is the cheaper version that you get double the juice instead of just 50 ml, to the Pure Parfum, which is what I have. And I'll tell you what, I've been craving this. In fact, I wore this probably twice in the last 2 weeks, which when you have a collection of 500 plus bottles, wearing the same fragrance again and again, shows that's kind of what you're craving. In fact, I didn't even think about wearing it again until I put it on. Then I went, I just wore that, because I usually try to wear different things and rotate the collection. But in the cold weather, this sort of sweet, cognac and tobacco combination is just perfect. People love it. It's funny, one of my coworkers, when I wore this to work, to the office, said, "You smell like Dr. Pepper." And I said, "Well, I think it smells like cherry Coke personally," but he got that cola vibe. And I was like, very good nose. But this has this heliotrope note, which is very amped up. If you can imagine this Coca-Cola, I said cherry Pepsi, my buddy said Dr. Pepper, but this Coca-Cola-like note with the fizziness of bergamot. Bergamot adds this sort of fizzy feeling. And there's the stickiness of benzoin and ambers and stuff like that underneath. There's some floral touches. Roja loves using May Rose and geranium and jasmine and all this stuff, and neroli. All of that stuff's in here. And this heliotrope note, which adds this sort of Play-Doh feeling. Like imagine kneading dough. It has this thickness to it, like the dough has risen in the oven. And underneath you have that boozy cognac, which I love. And cognac is actually an essential oil. They can get it out of the bottom of the oak barrels when the cognac is being distilled, and what's left over is this sediment underneath. And so if you can imagine that with like the warmth of tobacco, my only complaint with this fragrance is that the amber or vanilla, I should say, the vanilla in here is turned up too much. Like if they could just turn the sweetness down on that vanilla, I would say it's a masterpiece. Either way, the way it is right now, I still really enjoy it. I crave it. I love that cola opening. So this is Enigma, Pour Homme, or Creation E. Okay, so that's 5 niche fragrances that are still available right now to purchase. Let's do 5 discontinued, and then we'll hop to the designer side. Okay. First discontinued fragrance. We're going to stay with the House of Roja. And again, I've reviewed this one on the channel, but this is Fetiche Pour Homme. Now, at the end of the discontinued fragrance, 5 niche fragrances we're going to discuss, there is a fragrance that I like even more than Fetiche. But Fetiche to me is a very complex, very challenging leather chypre that if you've smelled things like Bel Ami, which is like one of my... If you said, Ramsey, you can keep 3 fragrances, Bel Ami would be one of them. Hands down, no questions asked. Okay, I wouldn't even think about it. It would be Bel Ami, Antaeus, and maybe the third one I'd have to think about. But this sort of recreates that Bel Ami style leather, which I love so much. It just speaks to me. It speaks to my heart, And it does it he's taken Bel Ami and he's Roja'd it up, okay? And this came out in 2012, a couple years after the final fragrance, which also in this discontinued list, which also lists Roja Dove as the perfumer, interestingly enough. But this is lime, bergamot, and lemon in the top, with jasmine from grass, neroli, fig, and violet. And so if you can imagine that sort of leathery base with labdanums and woods and smoky woods, and what he's done here is he's amped up a couple notes. One is the fig. The fig adds a little bit of this sort of fruitiness. And the second note he's amped up is this church-like incense. And so the incense is amped up. The frankincense is amped up. I've done a full review on Fetiche. They discontinued it just, I think, within the last year or so. Very, very sad to see this go, as I love wearing this fragrance. This style of perfume just speaks to me, especially in the cold. It's so perfect. So Fetiche Pour Homme from 2012 is the first discontinued niche on the list. The second discontinued niche on the list, which is also, it's kind of like, there's a couple fragrances on this list that don't fall into a specific category. Everyone wants to call a fragrance something, label it, and move on. And that's not always the case, okay? And so here, what we have is Amouage Fate for women. And there's a couple women's fragrances on this list that we're going to come to. Again, I don't really see gender in perfumery. And so I have no problem wearing these type of fragrances that are marketed towards women. If you're a guy, don't overlook them. I think for the longest time, I overlooked women's fragrances because I said, I like masculine stuff and on and on and on. And once I got over that sort of divide, it was like 50% of the fragrance world opened up to me. That was closed to me before, So this is discontinued, unfortunately. One of the most beautiful bottles you will ever see. This is the vintage sort of snap cap or whatever they call it, before it became magnetic. But this is a blend of an Oriental and a Chypre. That's why I said it doesn't really fit into a category, because it's like you're blending the two structures. and it opens up with cinnamon, pepper, bergamot, and one of the best chili notes I've ever smelled. Okay, so Thierry Mugler has a fragrance called Pure Chili, or it's actually called a Taste of Fragrance, but in the community it's known as Pure Chili. And while that's a very good chili note for a designer, this is on another level completely. The chili note adds that spiciness to the opening that's just works beautifully. It's a little different than what you're used to smelling. There is some pepper, but the chili adds something unique, and then it starts to dry down into this sort of floral take on opium, which is also in this list. So you can clearly see I like what I like, especially when the weather starts turning cold. And frankincense, so you have that amouage smoke. It's oriental. You have the beautiful floral heart with narcissus, jasmine, and rose. And there's that thick gummy labdanum. If you like the old school orientals of the past, done sort of in this amouage style, Dorothy P.O. hit it out of the park with this one. And frankincense, oak moss, there's a little bit of castoreum in the base with vanilla, benzoin, patchouli, and leather. I've got a full review on the channel if you want to check it out. But Fate Woman is the second discontinued niche. The third is a Creed. And it's funny because many people see Creed as a summer brand. And it is. Vintage Creed was all about this combination of that smooth sandalwood with that ambergris in the base. And, Creeds were always top notch at doing citruses. Very hard to do a citrus fragrance very, very well. Creed killed it, okay, in the old school days. Now, the new Creed is, like I said yesterday in my Amouage review, it's like you can kind of take all of the niche houses and just lump them all together. So you have Amouage, Creed, Roja, Parfum de Marly, Initio, MFK. You could just have one brand. It just feels like they're all putting out the same stuff. Back in the day, that wasn't the case. But Creed, old school Creed, they dabbled with some heavier fragrances that I really, really enjoy. And this is one that you can see. This is my dent, okay? So you can see how much I love this fragrance. This is called Acier Aluminum from 1973. It's supposed to be inspired by a knight's chainmail, okay? So there is this metallic twinge to it. But most importantly, there's this very strange, almost rotten fruit. Some people have said a banana-like accord, okay? But I'm just going to say there's this rotten fruit-like accord that is mixed with this almost like Guerlain-style vanilla. Okay, again, I've got a full review on the channel if you want to check it out. But it goes from spicy to fruity to that old-school vanilla with that sort of twinkle of ambergris. Ambergris adds this twinkle to the vanilla. That is just gorgeous. And this is one that you may have to pay big money for, unfortunately. But if you can find a bottle of Acier Aluminum at a good price, this is one of the better, heavier winter Creeds. Some folks have said it has a little bit of a potpourri vibe, but either way, it's got this beautiful aura for winter with the sort of powdery vanilla that comes through, almost edible vanilla in a way, but with this very strange 70s. I heard someone describe it as like a porn mustache. Sort of weirdness from the combination of strange fruits, kiwis, and rotten apples and bananas and all that stuff. But check this out if you're into those type of fragrances. Spicy, fruity, vanillic, beautiful, oriental. Perfect for the colder weather. Probably one of the best cold weather Creeds. Acier Aluminum. Okay, and then we've got two more on the discontinued niche side. The first is a really sad tale because not only is this fragrance discontinued, but the whole house has now been shuttered. This news came about a week or two ago, actually. This is from the house of Mona D'Orio, which this is a newer bottle. I also have a vintage bottle. This is my favorite Mona D'Orio fragrance, hands down. You guys know I'm a leather lover at heart. Any excuse to wear leathers and ouds and stuff like that are perfect for me for the cold weather. And this one's literally called Queer, which basically means leather. Came out in 2010, and so originally, a couple months back, maybe like 6 months ago now, 8 months ago, Parfumo started to show discontinued on some of these Mona D'Orios, and I was like, oh, damn. I thought maybe they were going through some sort of like a, switch over. They were maybe trying to sell the fragrances that made higher margins in different lines or something. I don't know what was going on with the House of Mona D'Orio, but I know that they had often said that before they reformulated something, they would discontinue it, okay? So I'm pretty confident that even in these new bottles, and I've shown the vintage bottle on the channel before, I prefer the vintage bottle. It's got a beautiful champagne-like cork. because her whole idea, Cap, because her whole idea was anytime you open one of my fragrances, I want it to be a celebration. I love that. I love the cap. I love everything about this brand actually. And I've got some more samples, so I will try and do some of these reviews because even though it's going to be hard to find if you don't already have a bottle, her brand deserves it, you know? She deserves to have her page marked in the history of fragrance. She really created something special with this brand. And interestingly enough, you know, um, we always talk about Pierre Bourdon and we always talk about Jean-Claude Elena as being like pupils of the great Edmund Rudnitska, one of the greatest perfumers of all time. Apparently, Mona Diorio was also a pupil to Edmund Rudnitska. Interestingly enough, she is listed as the perfumer here as well. But this has this very camphoraceous industrial leather. I love it. It's green. There's castoreum, so it's got that warmth, you know, that metallic warmth of castoreum here with the leather that comes through. And if you've ever smelled, there's a fragrance by Jacquemus called Jacquemus de Jacquemus. And, you know, this has a little bit of vintage Jacquemus de Jacquemus with the smokiness and the leather, but in a niche format. So very sad, not just that fragrance is discontinued, but the whole house is now shuttered. So sad news indeed. And then we've got the final discontinued creation, which is the 2010 version of Pure Distance M. And again, I said you can see the sort of pattern, okay, of the fragrances that first come to mind when I think of what I want to wear in the winter. I mentioned Fetiche. I mentioned Bel Ami, even though it's not in the list. Easily could have been in the list. And Pure Distance M is 2 years before Fetiche. Both are discontinued, all right? And so this is also credited as a Roja fragrance. And I'm just going to show you a picture to give you an idea of what this fragrance is supposed to smell like, because you can't do any better than this picture. Here it is. There's the picture right there. Look at the class, right? James Bond in a tuxedo and the Aston Martin in the background. This is supposed to smell like, this is Pure Distance M, by the way, from 2010. They've done a version 2.0, which I hear smells totally different, but the 2010 version is discontinued. Very spicy, leathery, much more leather than what you get in Roja's Fetiche. Fetiche starts amping up some of the things like the frankincense, the smokiness, the church-like frankincense with the fig and the violet and some other things. And some people like that, the complexity there. This really just focuses on the leather. It's like being inside of a luxury sports car. They say an Aston Martin. It could be a Lamborghini Aventador for all I care. It could be a Bugatti. Whatever luxury car suits your needs, that's what it smells like, with the warmth of cinnamon, oak moss in the base, some musk. It's just, man, these type of fragrances between this and Bel Ami, they really speak to me. They're perfect for winter. So Pure Distance M, unfortunately, another one you're going to have to probably really hunt for. But that's why I split up the currently in production and the discontinued side for you guys. So Pure Distance M, the fifth and final discontinued niche fragrance. Okay, so let's switch to the designers. Now, designers are usually where people cut their teeth. It's usually where folks get started in their fragrance journey, if you will. And I've got 5 amazing designers and 5 fantastic discontinued designers to go through. This is according to Parfumo, but to my understanding, the available versus discontinued is correct. So first one is going to be a Dior. And how could you have a list like this without having a Dior? This is Fahrenheit. I mean, Fahrenheit is iconic. 1988. I mean, that sort of gasoline opening. They call it the barrel note, if you will. And you know what? I've smelled a lot of different versions. This is a 2014 version, all right? I've got versions from the 80s. I have versions from the 90s. And I have this 2014 version. And I've smelled the early 2000 stuff. Now, the stuff in the early 2000, to my nose, had more of a vanillic twist, okay? And I think what ended up happening, and this is one of the times where I would say a modern reformulation fixed up a problem, because it started to get more and more vanilla in it. And I think whenever Francis Demachy took over as the in-house perfumer at Dior. He fixed that vanilla issue, made it smell more like what it used to smell like by some new modern aroma chemicals that came in that weren't available in the early 2000s, and created a separate Fahrenheit called the Le Parfum, or Parfum of Fahrenheit, and that's where he added more of the vanillic, more of the unisex Fahrenheit is what I would call it. But man, in the cold weather, that gasoline opening with the leather, with one thing people don't realize is that many people focus on the gasoline opening, and yes, it's amazing. Not many people focus on the leather in the dry down. The leather in this is fantastic. I absolutely love leather. You're seeing the theme over and over again, but they also don't focus on the florals. There's a huge floral heart in Fahrenheit. Listen to the florals. Chamomile, hawthorn, carnation, honeysuckle, jasmine, lily of the valley. Beautiful floral heart in this. Oh, it's so good. The smokiness. I love Fahrenheit. And everything from the presentation, the bottle, perfect for cold winter nights, in my opinion. And pretty much any form that you can get. You don't have to worry about hunting down a deep vintage and paying $1,000 or something, okay? You can go with one of the more modern versions, to my understanding, and still get an amazing fragrance. Okay, next on the list, we have an Aramis fragrance. Now, this is the one that's going to be contested, but it had to be in the list because I wanted the list to be sort of I didn't want to put too much thought into it. I wanted to put the fragrances in that first came to my mind, right? And this is one of the fragrances that had to be here, whether it's on the discontinued side or the available side, it had to be here. Now, Parfumo says it's still available and it's still being marketed. There's a rumor it was discontinued. And either way, I think you can find bottles floating around if you look. This is called Aramis Tobacco Reserve. This is, when I think of cold weather tobacco fragrances, this is what comes to mind. You know, I've got tobacco fragrances that focus more on the greener aspects, the sprightlier aspects of tobacco. There are even floral aspects of tobacco. You know, there's even flowers that grow off of the tobacco plant. But this is tobacco leaf. And I don't want to say it's an unsweetened version of tobacco because there is some sweetness in here. The sweetness comes from tonka bean, so it has a little bit of this nutty-like sweetness. But there's a rumor that this was done by a master perfumer, who I would consider a master anyways. His name was Edward Fleischier. That's according to Fragrantica. Parfumo doesn't list a perfumer here, but it smells like it's done by somebody special. It smells like it's done by somebody who has a deep understanding of how to create a fragrance, because you get this, almost this fruitiness from blackcurrant, you know? And the blackcurrant offsets the tobacco beautifully. It's a fruity tobacco with just a little bit of sweetness from the tonka bean, and the secret ingredient is the iris. The iris in this makes this feel posh. It makes it feel upper class. It makes it feel, you know, it has that sort of upper crust, that C-suite, you know? You were just promoted to CEO feel. This is the fragrance to wear. It has that feel about it. And I love the smokiness. I love the warmth of tobacco. There's so much in this fragrance that you will get to know the more you wear it. And I've got a couple bottles of this, thank God. But Aramis Tobacco Reserve to me is like the tobacco that comes to mind when I want a cold weather tobacco that just fits my needs perfectly. So very happy to have a bottle. Aramis Tobacco Reserve. We're putting it on the still available for purchase side, but it very well may have to be on the other side in your mind if you can't find it. But I'm going off of Parfumo. Okay. Next on the list is Opium, and this is another one that I'm going to cheat a little bit, because this vintage version of Opium that was done by Charles of the Ritz is no longer available. This version is discontinued. However, there is still an Opium that you can buy. It was redone in 2009 to my understanding, and it looks like it has a black stem in the middle if you look at the bottle. Anyways, I hear it's still an equally nice iteration. It may not be as thick, it may be a little bit thinner, but this is just a bomb of clove and, oh my God. I mean, fruits, the plum, the pepper, the cinnamon, the peach, the patchouli, most importantly, the base notes. You know, this is And this is, again, master perfumer, Jean-Louis Suizac, who I think is one of the all-time great. He would be on my Mount Rushmore as well. You know, the way the florals come forward, but most importantly, the resins, the myrrh, the apopanax, the frankincense, the tolu balsam, the amber, the benzoin. This is a perfect iteration of an Oriental. You could also include something like Youth Dew. You know, Youth Dew set the precedent for this style. And I know Estee Lauder was pissed off at Yves Saint Laurent for putting this out because she thought he stole her idea. And to be fair, I love Youth Dew. And in fact, one of my brothers, Bekzad, sent me a version of Youth Dew I've never smelled before, and it smells amazing, unbelievable. But there is some connection that I have with opium. It just speaks to me. And you know, when the weather gets like this is the kind of stuff I want to wear. The richness and the depth of opium blows me away every time. I'm shocked. I mean, no matter how many times I wear it, every single time I'm shocked by how it breaks down on my skin, how it wears, you know, the feeling it gives me. Opium is, there's a little bit of like dirty castoreum in there in the base too. It's just amazing. Everything from the bottle, the marketing campaign. Again, it's another one kind of like Fahrenheit where everything just works perfectly and it's perfect for the winter. So, Opium, the third still in production designer. Okay, 2 left. And again, I just went with what's the first thing that pops into my head that I want to wear in the cold weather. And I had to have my favorite vanilla on this list. Really, in any version of this, you can't go wrong. In fact, I think I'm going to spray it because I love this fragrance so much. It just puts me in this mood. It's perfect for the colder weather. This is Guerlain Shalimar. So this is the Eau de Parfum. One of these days, I will do a full review of Shalimar, but it's basically the vanilla, okay? For me, it's the vanilla. It is, my God, man. It's like 30% bergamot in the top two, and that bergamot adds that volatile facet to it, right? But it just dries down to this edible vanilla. And usually I don't like vanilla, but this vanilla is not sweet. It has this sexual aspect about it, you know, 2 bodies pressed against each other making love with that Guerlain poshness, you know. And there's something dirty, almost like the vanilla was left on the stove and burnt, you know, like there's a crust of vanilla on the bottom of the pan that's been burnt, and it almost starts to turn leathery. But the vanilla in here, this was created in 1925, I believe, originally. Coty's Emeraude, which smells very, very similar to Shalimar, came out in 21. There's some argument out there between the two sides. Some people say, well, Guerlain actually created Shalimar in 21, but it wasn't released under the Shalimar name until 25. It's like this whole thing, okay? Either way, both of these iconic fragrance houses from the past were competing against each other, borrowing from each other. And this was created when a new compound was created called vanillin. And I love Shalimar. Shalimar is the fragrance for me that opened my eyes to the fact that I need to stop being so strict on not wearing women's perfume. When I discovered Shalimar, the whole other side of the fragrance world opened up for me. This oriental spicy, and of course Shalimar is sort of calling. Shalimar is a Persian word that is meant to have like a calling to have the purest of all the human pleasures. Okay, and it's the name of the Indian garden that is in front of the Taj Mahal. So the Shalimar is what they call the gardens in front of the Taj Mahal. And the Taj Mahal was created by the Mughal emperor at the time, Shah Jahan, for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal. It's one of the most beautiful love stories of all time. Apparently, she didn't want to have any more kids, and he wanted another kid. He forced her to have another kid, and she died in childbirth, and he never forgave himself for the rest of his life, you know? And he built the Taj Mahal as like a monument to their love, okay? So it's supposed to invoke the beauty and the pleasure of the Orient. Again, the purest of all human pleasures, love. And so Shalimar has that feeling of 2 people making love. But it also has this sensual feeling, you know? It's it's not just the connection while the act of making love is going on. It's also the connection that they may have emotionally or spiritually, or how they feel when they see each other across the room or something like that, you know? That's the fragrance. It is amazing. And the tale goes that Jacques Guerlain, while playing with Jicky, sort of accidentally dumped too much vanillin in and created Shalimar, right? However it was done, it is my all-time favorite vanilla fragrance, hands down, and a top 10 fragrance of all time for me personally. All right, final designer on the list, and if you know me, these may not be a surprise to some of you guys who know me. If you're new to the channel, you may be taking notes, but for those who know me, this is probably going to come as no surprise. This is Antaeus. I mean, I wait all year to wear Antaeus. That's not true, but I have both Antaeus and Antaeus Sport Cologne. Many people don't even know there was a Sport Cologne. And so the Sport Cologne version I wear in the summer. When it gets cold, fall and winter, I pull out the OG Antaeus. Now, this is an older bottle because it has the chrome, but it's not the oldest bottle. I have some 80s bottles as well. They're all amazing. I don't think there's a bad version of Antaeus. It's still in production. Some folks were saying, Antaeus may be discontinued because they've been discontinuing the soaps and the body products and stuff like that. Usually when Chanel discontinues something, it's the soap and the body products that go first, then the fragrance. I'm hoping that's not true. God, I love Shalimar. Fuck. But Antaeus, I've done an entire review on Antaeus. It's a legend, you know? It's as grand as the name, Antaeus, the god, Antaeus. I go into the whole backstory. Go watch my review. It's one of the reviews that is a Vintage Hall of Fame review. I reserve those for my most, or what I consider to be the most influential fragrances from the past, okay? And I absolutely pour my heart into these Vintage Hall of Fame reviews. I also reviewed Egoist recently on the channel from 1990. You know, iconic men's fragrances, but Antaeus is the one for me. It just has that combination of Chanel class with that roughness, you know? One of my all-time favorite Castoreum fragrances ever, hands down, you know? That funky Castoreum, it's all about the Castoreum, people, is what I will say. I love it. I adore it. I'll never be without it. So Antaeus is the 5th cold weather winter fragrance that is still in production on the designer side. Okay, now we're going to do 5 discontinued fragrances, but just to let you know, there are so many discontinued designers I have in my collection that I want to show off that are perfect for winter. I already mentioned, you know, Giacomo de Giacomo, which is like a vintage version of Mona Diorio's Queer. There's another leather which never gets enough love. It's probably one of the discontinued, you know, designers from the past you may be able to find for a respectable price if you look. It's Lancetti Uomo. I reviewed this off of a decant. I loved it so much I had to get a bottle. In fact, I got 2. That's how much I love it. Lancetti Uomo is one of the best leather fragrances no one talks about. Oh, fuck. There's a celebrity fragrance called Jean-Louis Trintignant. This is an amazing take on this spicy musk with this anise sort of top. Oh, I love it. And probably one of the best celebrity fragrances outside of like Pavarotti or something like that. I'll review this one of these days. And I just want to show you some that I did not technically include, but they deserve to be discussed. They're perfect for cold weather. Perrac Pour Homme. This is a little bit of an unknown fragrance. And I think it was Armando who actually, wherever you are, Armando, I hope you're doing well, man. Man. Perrac Pour Homme is just, you know, it has a little bit of this fougere style, you know, but imagine like a hardcore leather fougere. If you ever smelled Jean Couturier's 12, you know, with that 80s style like fougere touch where it feels very aromatic in the top but very harsh and dense underneath. That's kind of like Perrac Pour Homme, but it's one of a kind, man. I love this stuff. And I'll review it one of these days as well. All of these easily. Even my scent of the day could have been on this discontinued sort of list here, this side. Actually, I think Giacomo de Giacomo may still be in production. I'm not 100% sure, but it's not this version. They've re-put it out. Okay, so let's do the 5 that instantly kind of came to mind. So the first one is Ébène de Balmain. So I reviewed this off of a mini that Amouage sent me. You can go watch my review. Unfortunately, it's like out of the 1,000+ videos I've uploaded, it's the one that has this smudge on the lens, so the quality's terrible. But if you don't mind putting up with terrible quality, I reviewed it, I discussed it, I fell in love with it, bought a bottle, and I love it even more now that I've had a chance to kind of wear it out of this bottle. But this is a spicy, woody, leathery green dream, okay? It's earthy. It's got this spearmint touch. If you've ever smelled, so this came out in 1983. If you've ever smelled the original Burberrys for men, which I also discussed recently on the channel. If you watch some of my most recent videos from a week or two ago, you will have remembered I wore that as my scent of the day. And so, Burberry's for Men has this like spearminty, like minty sort of opening thing, but it's put into this sort of, very complex vintage style underneath. But that fresh blast of aromatic opening will remind you a little bit of Aben de Balmain. I actually think this is even better than Burberry's for Men. There's something about the way the notes come to you in this. It's like the top is like an aromatic fougere, you're going to get reminded of maybe things like Paco Rabanne Pour Homme and stuff like that. But the dry down is on a completely different level, once you get past the green touches, which you never truly get past. I mean, the color of the juice is green, but the name is reminiscent of the ebony tree. And the ebony tree is actually one of the most expensive woods in the world. There's a very high demand and a very low supply, but the ebony tree has this very rich, dense smell, okay? It's deep, it's luxurious, it's warm, it's very complex, and you get this very complex smell. Like the wood is just so dense that you cannot get through it, Light can't pass through, obviously, but imagine even things like x-rays and stuff can't pass through because there's this density. Think of like that bib they put on you at the dentist when they x-ray your teeth or something. There's this lead thick density, all right? It has a almost leaning burnt because of the ebony black type feel. Placed underneath that aromatic spearmint fresh, sort of green, you get the herbal side of basil and stuff like that. And it has the, the feel of sort of dried out herbs and spices. And there's some artemisia in here, which adds this earthy woodiness to it as well. And of course, it just dries down to this unbelievable leather and amber, frankincense, labdanum, moss, which just create this, if you can almost imagine it in reverse. So you don't get the black dark wood at first, you get the green. So imagine you tip the bottle upside down, you get the green, and then at the base you just have all of these dense, thick, ebony type notes. Absolutely phenomenal. Perfect for the cold weather. Spicy, woody, leathery. It's a dream. Absolute dream that, it's kind of one of those unicorns in the discontinued world. Okay, next on the list, since I did a full review of Ebony, I'm also going to discuss a fragrance that I also poured my heart into. There's a Vintage Hall of Fame review of this on the channel as well. This is Balenciaga Pour Homme, one of the most iconic vintage masculines from 1990, and probably one of the best spicy cinnamony openings of all time. You can go watch my full review if you want to really hear what I think about it, but it's got Ceylonese cinnamon. It's got one of the best patchoulis that you will smell. There is this almost like, if you take a look at the cap and you see kind of the swirl, if you will, and, but you see how it almost looks like it's some rare gem or something. And again, there's a denseness to these vintage fragrances from the past. There's a thickness. This used Yugoslavian oak moss. And it's funny because they specify Yugoslavian oak moss and cypress and amber, but it's that swirl of spices with the woods. Apparently this did not sell very well when it came out. It was not what was popular at the time. In 1990, people wanted to buy fresh things. They wanted to buy cool water and stuff like that with Calone and, you know, aquatics and stuff like that. This is the exact opposite of that. That's why the vintage guys like me love this so much. So I've got a couple bottles. You can go watch my full review if you have not watched it yet. But, you know, these two were vintage Hall of Fame reviews that I absolutely poured my heart into because they're two of my all-time favorites. So Balenciaga Pour Homme is a legend and perfect for the cold weather. Next on the list is one that I mentioned there's going to be some feminine fragrances discussed. I've got multiple videos on the channel about this. This is Teatro alla Scala. I mean, Teatro alla Scala is one of those fragrances that absolutely knocked me off my chair the first time I smell it. I think I literally fell off my chair. The first time I smelled this, I was like, this is what a $30 discontinued fragrance smells like. I mean, and at the time, you could buy bottles for $30. I think I paid $30 for this bottle. And what's funny is now I think good luck finding it for anywhere near that. But I got very, very lucky. And look at the bottle. It's just stunning. But Teatro alla Scala is basically this very complex 80s style, feminine targeted Chypre. Okay? And again, it blends Oriental and Chypre qualities. And so it's aldehydic in the top. It's got bergamot, coriander, and this fruity accord. But one of the most important notes is this animalic beeswax. And the way the perfumer combined the animalic beeswax, the old school carnation, geranium, jasmine, orris root, rose, tuberose, ylang ylang with a base of civet, oak moss, benzoin, musk, patchouli, vetiver, and frankincense. You know, Teatro alla Scala is talking about the very famous opera house. I believe it's in Milan, if I'm not mistaken. But I talk about all this stuff when I did my early impression video. In my comparison, I compared the EDT versus the EDP. It doesn't matter what you get. EDT, EDP, Pure Parfum, whatever you can find, get it. It is a gem. I mean, so much so, I am under the sort of impression, I would say, that a master perfumer did this. Somebody who, even though there's no perfumer listed, because Kritsia doesn't always disclose their perfumers, someone who really knows what they are doing, or, you know, I would say maybe grew into a master perfumer, I think did this. I don't think this was just done by anyone off the street, you know. My opinion was that somebody who really knew his stuff did Teatro alla Scala, or her stuff. So yes, just a dream to wear. I love, this is probably one of my, if not my favorite feminine targeted releases from the 80s. And that's saying a lot, you know, it's saying a lot. Okay. Speaking of amazing feminine targeted releases from the 80s, this is from 87. So we go from 86 to 87, and this is Ma Liberté by Jean Patou. This is a perfumer's perfume, okay? This is a perfume done by a master perfumer who was at the top of his game. This is a woody, spicy, green, lavender heavy. Again, this is another one where it feels like you're sort of blending this sort of fougere aspects because of the lavender. However, just having lavender does not make it a fougere with this Chypre base, you know? It's got the sort of bergamot, labdanum, oak moss combination that you would expect. But the spices in here will blow you away. I mean, the clove, the way that the cinnamon and clove sort of just swirl together, the rose, the nutmeg, and that lavender, man. I mean, this may be one of my favorite lavender notes in all of perfumery, and it wears heavy. You know, a lot of fougères don't wear heavy to me. I like wearing like a traditional classic fougère, like an aromatic fougère. Many people like to wear those in winter. Not me. I like to wear those in summer. And so this is kind of like the fougère style for someone who wants to wear a fougère, but for the cold weather, because it has this density to it. And to make it even better, it has that old school Mysore sandalwood in the base that is just unbelievably smooth. But it's mixed with ambers and vanilla and, you know, the heavier notes, some nutmeg, and it is a dream to wear. I love this so much. These two from the 80s absolutely blow me away. Okay, Final one, and I know a lot of you guys complain about some of these harder defined fragrances that I discuss on the channel and stuff like that. So I wanted to close with something easy to find. Very similar to Halston Z14 in that a ton of bottles were made, and now it's officially discontinued according to Parfumo. But there's so many bottles that were floating around out there, you can find bottles for cheap, basically. And I wanted to close with this one because even though it's discontinued, this fragrance sort of influenced years, decades, I would say, to come after this. This is Lagerfeld Cologne. The newer one says Lagerfeld Classic. The vintage bottles were Lagerfeld Cologne. Excuse me. And this is basically a spicy oriental that has this orange line running straight through it. There's this aldehydic, powdery, sort of orange line that runs straight through the middle of the fragrance. And again, it's got tobacco in it. The vintage has more tobacco. It has more of the manly notes in there, like the oak moss and stuff like that. The newer one has a little bit more vanilla, a little bit more powders, but this influenced years/decades of what came after. I don't think there would be a KL, which was Fragrance of the Year in '82 from Lagerfeld, if there wasn't a Lagerfeld Cologne. There wouldn't be a KL Homme, and there definitely would not be a Calvin Klein Obsession. Calvin Klein Obsession really feels like it was spun out of Lagerfeld Cologne. And so this is kind of one of those fragrances that may not be for everyone, but I love wearing it in the cold. It is perfect in the cold weather. It has that oriental vibe and that tobacco combination with the sort of very powdery orris with amber in the base. And it really has this orange feel. Look at the color of the juice. You know, it has this powdery orange feel. Ron Winograd is the perfumer. He's another one of those all-star perfumers. Unfortunately, he didn't do enough. He made Furio. He made Leonard pour Homme. Both of those could be on this discontinued list for winter as well. But I wanted to highlight one that was probably a little bit easier to find at the end. So Lagerfeld Cologne from 1978. So that is my winter list. I can't believe it took almost 3 years for me to do a winter list, but I hope this has helped. I hope you got some either enjoyment or made some notes on some fragrances that you will try to go after and smell. I've been doing a lot of individual reviews lately, so we're going to be coming up on the time where we're going to do some lists. I'm going to do a list of a famous bottle maker. I already did one for Pierre Denant. I'm going to do another one, which I'll unleash whenever I actually do the list. And I'm going to do the best of 2024 once we get to the end of the year. So that may be like a New Year's special or something like that. But hope you guys enjoyed the winter list. Here in Texas, it's just finally feeling like winter. I think we maybe got below freezing like once or twice already, but it took until 2 or 3 weeks ago until we, finally really started to get cold. It's December 11th right now. So we were hot for the longest time. Even on Halloween, it was warm in Texas. So now it's really starting to feel like winter. I was motivated to do this list. So I hope you guys enjoyed the list. I really appreciate you guys' support, watching, commenting, liking, all the stuff you do to support me. It's a pleasure and an honor to do these videos for you guys. Cheers. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.